Thank you for joining us today for Save Money on Food. We are going to be talking a lot about a extremely variable cost in a lot of our budgets. Definitely in my budget, it varies a lot from month to month. So there's always opportunities to look for savings. My name is Andrea Pellegrini, and I run the Student Money Management Center for the entire University of Illinois system. I'm joined today by my colleague, Nikki. Nikki, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Nikki Jankola Shanks, and I am the policy director with it at the Division of Banking, which is a division within IDFPR, which stands for the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation.
Thank you, Nikki. And our colleague, Emily Harmon from Illinois Extension, also helped on the slides today, but she had a prior commitment that she needed to make sure to take care of today. So it's just going to be Nikki and I facilitating. Suhas is joining us in the chat, as well as Kwabena and Steve for answering any questions you might have or taking note of them to ask us at the end. And Suhas is also sharing our webinar links in the chat. So collectively, the Get Savvy team represents organizations across the state of Illinois, which rest on the land of multiple Native nations. We'd like to begin today by recognizing and acknowledging that these organizers primarily reside in Illinois and serve the state of Illinois, which includes the ancestral lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Ottawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. And we have a responsibility to acknowledge these Native nations and to work with them as we move forward as a vibrant and inclusive society. So we also like to poll who is here today. So I'm going to try to launch a poll. I feel like they moved the polls on me. All right, I just launched a poll. This demographic information lets Illinois Extension maintain funding for partnering with us on the Get Savvy Grow Your Green Stuff webinar series. It also gives us information about how to direct some of the examples that we talk about throughout the webinar, as well as how we best accommodate some of our participants with any follow-up information that might be needed. So it looks like we have very broad age range of participants today. We have students and employees and retired folks, a lot of women here today, but we have representatives from all genders, and we have pretty diverse set of race and ethnicities. Thank you for answering that. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. I'll share the results real quick if you're interested in seeing who else is joining us today. But I'm going to stop sharing. If you still see the window, you can go ahead and exit out of that. That's not going to bother anything. So for our learning objectives today, we want to discuss some budget-friendly meal planning ideas. We're going to review different ways to save money on food costs and some of the trends related to food costs. We're also going to talk about how to prevent food waste, and we're going to explore some technology and food shopping methods to hopefully help you maintain savings in your food budget. All right, so to get us started, we're going to talk about what do food expenditures look like in the United States. So we're going to talk about some of the trends and the data related to food spending. So for 2022, food was the third largest portion of total annual household expenses on average for American consumers. It was behind housing and transportation. Food made up about 12.8% of household expenses, according to the USDA reviewing the consumer expenditure survey data for 2022. Since 1960, the total of disposable income spent on food in the United States has gone down overall, but in the last few years, we saw this deep decline in food away from home due to the pandemic, and now we're seeing a kind of this significant increase in money spent both on food away from home and food at home. So overall, food at home prices that's food you eat at home, obviously, increased 5% in 2023 compared to 2022, which is less than the increase in 2022 compared to 2021, when food at home prices increased by 11.4%. But just to give you some context, the typical level of retail food price inflation over the last 20 years has been around 2.5%. So this is still a really big increase in cost. So if we look at a broader set of years for spending from 2019 to 2023, so pre-pandemic to last year, the All Food Consumer Price Index, or CPI, which is a measure of inflation, rose by 25%. This is a higher increase than all the items in the CPI, or Consumer Price Index, which grew by 19.2% over that same period. So food price increases were below the 27% increase in transportation costs, but they rose faster than housing, medical care, and all other major categories that are tracked in the CPI. So food prices in 2020 to 2021 were largely driven by, obviously, shifting consumption patterns by consumers and supply chain disruptions resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2022, food prices increased faster than any year since 1979. Partly due to the bird flu outbreak that affected egg and poultry prices, and the conflict in Ukraine, which compounded other categories of the CPI, like high energy costs, for example. So a lot of different things contributing to this fluctuation in food prices, and a significant increase in the past couple of years, which I'm sure everyone here has felt in their personal budgets. So inflation can be a really complicated topic, since there's a lot of ways that it can be measured, not just the CPI, and there's different industries that can be affected by inflation at different rates, as we just kind of discussed. Obviously, food was impacted at a different rate than transportation and other costs. But you can learn more about inflation from our previous webinar on inflation, as well as the Making Sense of Money podcast series on economic indicators that we did. So Suhas just shared links to those in the chat if you're interested. And we will also share all the links that we're putting in the chat in the follow-up email that we send to all the registrants. So in general, the amount of money spent on food as a percentage of total food expenditures, has increased since 1960, like the total amount of food. In 2022, the cost of food away from home was approximately 56% of total annual food expenditures. So we're spending more on food in general, but we're spending over half of it on food away from home, which has increased in cost significantly over the past several years. So just keep that in mind. We're also going to talk about generations. So researchers and marketers like to look at trends based on when someone was born. So we have this generational data that we can use. Each study that you look at that considers generational data may use different date ranges to categorize the generations, but this is what the Consumer Expenditure Survey has used recently. So we want to talk about these generations before we talk about food spending, not spood vending, food spending differences by generation, as it has to do with food, right? So Generation Z is the youngest identified generation right now. This is people born after 1996. Millennials were born in the 80s and early 90s. Gen Xers were born in the mid 60s through 1980. Boomers were born between 1946 and 1964. This is the most consistently defined generation. When you look at other studies, it's usually the 1946 to 1964 range. The silent or traditionalist generation was born before 1945. And most of those in the greatest generation, that's people born between 1900 and 1925, are no longer with us. So they are not included in this particular study as a generation to look at for trends. So if you're looking, so this graph kind of shows total spending based on food spending categories. So cereals and bakery versus meats, poultry, fish, and eggs versus dairy versus fruits and veggies versus other food at home, and then food away from home. As you can kind of see, Gen X spends the most food each year on average compared to all the other generations. They are also likely to make up the most of our peak earners. This is where you make the most money in your career on average by age. So they're able to afford to spend more on food, and they may be supporting bigger families, right? So those are things to consider with Gen X spending more. All the generations like to eat out, though the silent generations tends to spend less on eating out on average. This generation would include almost exclusively retirees, so they're more likely to have a fixed income, which could be influencing food spending choices and their ability to eat out. Millennials spend more on fruits and veggies compared to all other generations, which was also true the last time we did this webinar before Gen Z joined the chat. So I thought that was interesting that millennials maintained spending the most on food compared to all other categories. And we could probably spend a lot of time on these generational differences, but we just kind of want to give you an idea of we have different approaches to food spending, capacity for food spending, and then within food spending, what we like to spend on or what we tend to spend more on. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Nikki, and we have another poll.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. So Andrea is going to go ahead and launch that poll. So choose three of the, you see a poll on your screen, or you should. Of those choices that are listed, what are the three most important to you about the food that you buy? You can go ahead and I'm going to give it a few.
You might have to also scroll down. So there's like cost, convenience, ease of preparation, low calorie, high calorie, nutrition, whether it's organic, the sustainability of the food that you're eating, whether it's tasty or maybe it's something else. So there's a lot of different choices in there.
I'm going to give it. All right. I think that looks like people have answered. So go ahead and share. You guys can see cost is obviously most important to the majority of people, followed by nutrition, and then convenience and ease of preparation. I would say 3, 4. They're very close to each other. So these are all important values. What's important to you, right? When you are going shopping or anything related to food. So keep that in mind as we go through this next phase, that we are going to provide, some different tips and tricks, but depending on what may be most important to you, you may have to adjust according to your beliefs and values. All right, so let's talk about some cost cutting strategies. So I feel like a lot of times when people talk about saving money on food, the first thing that everybody says is don't go out at all, right? But that's not, it doesn't need to be one or the other. You don't have to cook at home or eat out. There's a way that you could balance both of them. You need to consider the pros and cons of each and find what works for you in your particular situation. So cooking at home obviously allows you more control over ingredients. So if that's something that's important to you, it may be easier for you to cook at home. It is often cheaper than going out. And then, eating out could take less time. If you're not that great at cooking, it may be easier, more convenient. So you could balance it, like as I said, it does not have to be one or the other. So these are some of the popular ways to reduce food costs. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. So one is eating at home more. If you are eating out, 6 days a week, if you cut that back, you're going to be able to easily save some money there. Along with that is using what you already have on hand to cook. This is something that I am guilty of, that I'll see a new recipe and I'm like, oh, I'm going to try that. And I buy a whole bunch of new stuff when there was plenty of stuff I could have made for dinner that I already spent money on. So there are different apps, which we talk about some apps later, that you can actually enter in the food that you have as well, that will give you some recipes. Use a shopping list. So people who shop with a list tend to spend less than people who shop without one. And that is regardless if you are shopping online, if you're doing online grocery shopping or in-store shopping. If you have a list, you tend to spend a little less. The other thing is buying store brands over big name brands will also save you some money. There's actually an example a little further down in this webinar that we'll talk about, but that could save you anywhere from a couple bucks to much more than a couple dollars. Compare unit pricing. We're going to talk about that more. Pay attention to portion sizes too. This is true whether you're eating out or at home. Make sure you may, if you cook a meal, you may be able to get a couple meals out of that actual recipe that you're cooking or following. So if you're sticking to the portion size that is recommended. Incorporate leftovers in your meal plan. We're going to talk later too about food waste and how that contributes to the cost of food overall. But just know that if you have leftovers, it's best, even if you don't want them exactly the same, somehow cooking using parts of your leftovers in a new meal will also help you save money. And then trying to reduce food waste in general will also help you keep some costs down. One other thing I wanted to note too that wasn't listed on here, I apologize, I skipped over it in my brain. There is some research that shows that the farther away you go to shop, the more likely you are to spend spontaneously. So if you are going out to your local grocery store that maybe 5 minutes, you probably are going to stick to what you actually need because you know you can go there anytime. But if you're traveling 20 minutes to get to the special store that you want, you're going to end up spending more money. So just keep that part in mind as well. Along with that, there has always been a thing when talked about saving costs on food that sometimes people will say, you should only shop once a week. Don't shop anymore. That's not necessarily true. It depends on your spending habits. And again, what is important to you. If food waste is a big concern to you, then you may want to go 2 or 3 times a week because you're just going to buy what you need as you need it. If you're really big into fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables, you may want to go multiple times to get those every day. So it just, if you limit your shopping to just once a week, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to save money. It just means you have to adjust that according to your beliefs. All right, so unit pricing. So this kind of shows how to compare costs using the unit pricing on food. All of your food, not even just food, really, if just anything at the grocery store will have something like this on them. So this breaks it down, the cost per unit. This is usually given in ounces when it's food, as you could see above. So there's the item barcode, the item description, and then this total price. That's how much for whatever you happen to be buying, right? But this price per unit, 9.8 cents per ounce. this is what you may want to look at when you're actually comparing different brands, different products, because it's taking how much, it's giving you a more realistic look at how much this is costing you. There is that whole, if you have two sizes and people are like, oh, if I buy more, then it's cheaper. That's not always true. So this is a good way to check. And it's a good thing to pay attention to. And so on the next slide, this is a real life example that Andrea and I made together, that using rolled oats. So one of our tips at the beginning, if you remember, was to buy store brand versus name brand, right? So here you can see everything is the same between the name brand and the store brand oats. And not only is the serving size the same, number of servings, etc., the total cost is more, and you could look at exactly how much more you're paying per serving. So here you're paying 18 cents per serving for a name brand versus 13 cents per serving for a store brand. So it's just another way to kind of get you used to comparing food and prices. The units can come in many different sizes. You may want to compare the cost per serving rather than the cost per ounce of different foods. Again, that's just a personal preference. But for example, if you have a bag of apples, you might consider one apple as a serving. So you would divide the cost for the entire bag by the number of apples that are in the bag. You may also want to consider nutritional value, your food preferences, and the need for variety in your diet when you're looking at things to buy. So food waste. This, according to a consumer food waste study that was done in 2020, it included 40,000. You okay, Andrea? Sorry. Was I moving too fast for you?
No, I think my computer froze and I tried to catch up with you.
Oh,
We're all
sorry.
good
I was
now.
just like, uh-oh. Okay. So this survey included 40,000 adults and they tracked them over a 16-year period. And during that time, they found that the average American consumer spends approximately $1,300 per year on food that eventually goes to waste. So this is talking about things that you buy and then throw out because you don't use it in time by the sell by or best by date. This is talking about food that you just maybe you cooked and then you didn't eat the leftovers, so you threw away, or you ate out and you took leftovers and then didn't eat those leftovers and you're throwing that away. So that is a lot of money per year. And food waste, not only does it impact your own wallet, but it also has negative impacts on food security, the environment, and climate change. So 149 billion meals worth of food goes into landfills in the United States. That's just the United States. So food waste is definitely something that you want to be aware of as you're trying to save money on food. So here are some tips to actually reduce that food waste. Again, we talked about pre-planning your grocery list. This includes maybe meal planning and writing out that list. Again, practicing the portion control. Love your leftovers. I know that this is something that we are guilty in my house, that we have leftovers and we're like, oh, we're going to eat this. And then we forget and then we don't, and we're throwing it away. And that's a meal that that's money I literally am throwing away. Compost, don't trash. That's a little bit more involved, but there are ways to do it. And there's also ways that I know, depending on your community, if that is something you're interested in, you could look up, because a lot of community groups now have like a composting type collective, almost, I want to say. Understanding your date labels as well. There's especially on some things like deli meats or things like that, there's a sell by date and then there's a best by date. So the sell by, that just means it needs to be off the shelves by that day. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad on that day. So keep that in mind. Um, your perishable items that you buy, make sure that you only buy what you're going to be able to eat within that time period. So I always use bananas as an example, that if you go to the store and you buy bananas that are already pretty yellow, you know you're only going to have a couple days before they start to turn brown. And if you buy those super yellow bananas and you're like, oh, but I'm actually not home to eat these, right? So it's thinking, switching your thinking to plan ahead a little bit. The other thing you can do is freeze to save your food. So like those leftovers, right? Maybe you pack some away and save them for a different day if you don't want to have the same thing back to back. You can make bigger meals and then save time and money by freezing it. So that way, if you're in a rush one night, you're like, oh, but I just have this in the freezer I could take out, rather than going to spend money on new food. Order out wisely. We're going to talk a little bit more about this next, about when you order and eat out and things like that. But just make sure your portions are very big. A lot of times if you're eating out at restaurants, so that's something where you may want to split in half to say take some home. Knowing the food safety standards, so that way, you're not leaving perishables out at room temperature for more than 2 hours, things like that. And then finally, the USDA has a Food Keeper app that is really helpful when it comes to talking about food waste and looking at different aspects of what you can do and ways to avoid it. All right, so food delivery apps. I'm sure everybody here has heard or used one or multiple food delivery apps. Um, these are apps that restaurant delivery so a restaurant allows customers to connect their food needs with services and make it accessible to order from multiple places. So these food delivery apps can be fast food, they could be sit down restaurants, it could be grocery stores, it could be a Walgreens, whatever it might be, right? Like a pharmacy. So you could sit down, put your order in, and have it delivered to you when you need to. However, there's some things that you need to think about using, because there's so many out there, right? There's Grubhub and Uber Eats, and I can't even think of all of them right now. Plus, then there's grocery stores that have their own apps that maybe deliver or pick up and etc. So when you're comparing, you want to think about how often you're going to use it, because some of these delivery apps have a fee attached to them that for example, I'm just gonna Instacart, I know my parents are elderly, they don't like to it's harder for them to go to the grocery store, especially in the winter, so they use Instacart, and I know through their experience that there's a yearly fee. For them, that yearly fee is worth it because it's way more convenient than having my older parents go out in snow and ice, right? But that may not be true for everybody. Also look at the cost. There's a lot of hidden fees within delivery apps. Like I said, there may be a yearly membership, but there's also sometimes the tipping on there is sometimes automatic. There's also usually some sort of delivery fee. Sometimes an item is actually more expensive on one of these delivery apps as opposed to just going to the store. And I'm not talking about big stuff. It could even be something as simple as like a bag of apples. Sometimes delivery apps have a little bit of surge pricing. So you just want to make sure you're catching that. The variety of apps. You may be able to look and see what type. I'm going to tie that into the number of restaurants featured. If that's something that's important to you, you may want to use one over the other. Also, make sure you're checking that your actual location is served by whatever app that you are interested in, because some of them are not available everywhere. Membership options, I address that with the frequency of use as well. And sometimes there are other delivery options provided through the app that you may not realize at first glance, and that may be something that's important to you or something that you definitely don't want a part of because it makes it even more expensive, whatever it might be. So yeah, I mean, I think that this really exploded. These types of things have been around for a really long time, but I think that the use of these really exploded during the COVID-19 pandemic when it was, we couldn't really go anywhere. And now that things are getting, normal, it's just one of those things you want to make sure you're double checking when you use it and that you're okay paying for those, whatever is on those delivery apps. So picking up versus delivery, this is something else that it gives you the convenient part of the convenience of that delivery app. Because, for example, I'm just going to use a grocery store, for example, because we're talking about food. For me personally, I pick up groceries all the time because for me, the time it saves is very important to me. So I'll go on my app, I'll go to pickup versus delivery. And the way that that can help you save money is that if you are able to pick up, right, you're going to have no delivery fee. You're going to have no tip that's added onto those delivery apps. So that is one big aspect of picking up versus delivery. The other thing to look for is on the app, different apps. If you, for example, let's say you go to a popular delivery app. I'm just going to name one for sake of like Grubhub, right? And you may go through Grubhub to go to your grocery store because Grubhub delivers from your local Kroger. However, you may want to look and instead go directly to Kroger because now sometimes a lot of these grocery stores, a lot of the restaurants have these own order ahead and pickup options that then there's no middleman in between and it saves money on fees. The example that I always talk about is pizza. Pizza delivery has been around forever, right? Now on some of these delivery apps, you could go through the app to get a pizza delivered from your favorite pizza place, but chances are that same pizza place also has their own delivery. And so then you're not adding additional cost by having that middleman route. Another thing to think about is that it, depending on your own situation and the type of transportation that you have available to you, delivery may be more convenient if you don't have a vehicle or you don't have the time. I know, for example, when my daughter was a newborn, my husband and I had groceries delivered a few times because we were too tired. But it doesn't again, that all depends on what is important to you. So cooking at home more, there are strategies. I know it can seem a little overwhelming or daunting, but there are ways that you could cook at home. One is to simplify. Find simple recipes. There are a lot of recipes now, especially online, with different apps and things like that that you can look at that has 5 ingredients or less, 1-pan meals, one fryer meals. Sorry, I just lost my words there for a sec. Sorry. So you could always try that. and see if that works for you. The other thing is to make more meals. So if you're going to sit and take the time to make a meal, consider doubling what you're going to make and then freezing the rest. So now you have double the amount of meals that you're only cooking once to get double the amount. Also, make sure you stock up on a lot of commonly used items. Keep them on hand so that way you could quickly throw something together to cook if you hadn't had a chance to meal plan ahead or think about what you're going to eat. You have stuff available at home. You don't have to go out. So in the chat, if you guys want to go ahead and put what kind of foods do you guys like to keep on hand so that way you know that you have um, something to eat if you don't want to take the time, if you don't want to spend the money to go out. Rice, potatoes, rice and potatoes, cans of soup, oatmeal, chicken. I'm with you there. We always have chicken on hand. And we always have pasta and pasta sauce too. Beans, hamburger meat, rice and stew, canned chicken, tuna, salmon, rice, veggies. Yep, frozen vegetables, lentils, eggs. We always have eggs at my house. Yeah, these are all really good answers. And here is some items to consider to keep on hand. A lot of these we talked about already, you guys already do, but some other ones that you may want to think of that you could have quick. All right, so eating out. I know we've talked a lot about, you could reduce costs by eating out. However, the bottom line is that eating out is an everyday, it's a social part of our lives. It's fun. It's not going to go away. It's unrealistic to say, I'm never going to eat out again. Like that's just not going to happen. And we talked about balance at the very beginning of this webinar. So how can we do that? So here are some tips to lower your cost if you do eat out. One is to share entrees. However, we put this on this webinar with a little star next to it. You may want to, some restaurants have started to charge to share a plate. So you may want to make sure it would be listed somewhere on the menu. So you may want to take a look so you don't get an extra charge you weren't counting on. Another thing is ordering water with meals. I know a lot of times people talk about other alcohol, like if you're having an alcoholic beverage or something like that, but even soda or any other type of pop, maybe $4 when you go sit down at a restaurant. So lemonade may be just as expensive. So that's something to watch. You may think that you're ordering something that's a little bit cheaper, but if you order water, you won't get charged at all. If you have a favorite place or places that you like to eat or pick out at or pick food up at, look for coupons. I know it sounds crazy, but there are coupons, there are digital ones, there are still ones that are sometimes sent in mail. Look for those because it could save you money. Another one to do is to do lunch rather than dinner out. This is something actually recently my husband and I have done, like a lunch date as opposed to a dinner date to save some money. So that lunch, a lot of times it's the same food, a little bit smaller portions and cheaper. Also, go out knowing what you want to spend. If you have a goal in mind, like, okay, I could spend $15, then okay, I have $15 to spend. What can I? One thing to do is called the step down method. It's really hard to go from doing something you love every single day and just being like, well, I'm not going to do that at all anymore. All right. So instead of completely cutting it out right away, step it down. So if you're going out 4 times a week and you're spending $80, the next week, go out 2 times a week and spend $40. And then the week after that, 1 times a week, spending $20. You're cutting it in half. All right. And you can use this method for anything, but with food and eating out, this is a tool. I use coffee as an example. You go out for coffee 4 times a week. next week try 2 times, and then 1 time, and then that way it's not cold turkey. Um, yeah. And so in the chat, what is your best cost saving food tip that you guys follow?
Shopping at
Oh,
specific grocery stores. Yes,
yeah.
Aldi,
Yes. Walmart,
Walmart.
food prep. Yep. Trying to spend less this month than last. Coupons. Crockpot. I'm a huge crockpot girl. Um, man, I need to go to my Aldi more apparently.
You definitely
Buying
do.
it's just there's not one super close to me, so that's part of the reason why I haven't. Shopping bulk buying, and that's definitely something too that we were talking about Costco, Andrew and I earlier, and Steve, but that's where using that when you go into those big bulk places, it may be cheaper for you to buy in bulk if you use a ton of the same thing or your family does, but that's where that unit pricing can come in handy, and also making sure you're looking at the expiration dates, because you may be like, oh, my family will eat this, and then you realize it actually expires a week from now, and there's no way you're going to get through everything by then. So if you are bulk shopping, that is something just to keep in mind, to think about that unit pricing and how much you're actually going to need, and how much time you have to use it for.
And how much freezer space you have. If you're like my family, there's only two of us. And if we buy in bulk, we're definitely not going to eat all the fresh veggies. So how much do we have the space for freezing if it comes to that point, right?
Oh, this isn't ordering from the kids menu when going out when possible for kids and adults. Taking snacks and water with you when you go out. That's also a good one that I'm going to say, is that a lot of places actually allow for snacks to come in, which I didn't realize. Like if you're going out, let's say you're taking an adventure day, you're going to the zoo, you're going, whatever it might be. A lot of those places now do allow some snacks. So that's something that you could check out before you go.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk about how to pull it all together, right? We've learned some things, we've shared some things in the chat. We always learn things from each other. Let's pull all these new valuable insights together. So, one of the big things with cutting your food spending is creating a meal plan. You got to plan ahead a little bit. You want to add this to your schedule, your weekly calendar, when are you going to shop, when you're going to meal plan. You might want to decide on your dinner menus first, since that typically is a bigger meal for most of us, not all of us. When you don't have much time to prepare dinner, you might want to think about doing meal prep the evening before or early in the morning. A lot of people do this with crockpot meals, which I saw a lot in the chat. So you will definitely want to be sure to refrigerate food to avoid any spoilage if you're doing this meal prep early. Obviously, you want to plan to use your leftovers like we talked about before. You can mix it up. You can remix your leftovers with different meals. Crock pot or one pot meals or skillet meals can be really helpful. Crock pots are used to cook food slowly and safely, or you can do quick to cook meals and include that in your meal plan as well. Obviously, we talked about using what you have on hand, so you might want to inventory what you have in your pantry and plan to use what's going to expire soon, or what you might have a lot of in meals before it gets out of hand, right? Obviously, grocery ads might be helpful. Grocery store ads, they might buy too many bananas, and you can include that in your meal planning efforts as well. And then you also want to make sure that you're thinking about your lunch ideas if you're going to have lunch out, and thinking about what you might order while you're having lunch out, or if you're going to make sure to use leftovers, that would be really important. You also want to think about breakfast and snacks. You can't just ignore those aspects, but you might look for ways to save on those things. And then you obviously want to write down your shopping list as well before you go shop, whether that be online or in store. All right, so we have this really cool produce by season sheet in the chat that Suhas just shared. Emily shared this with us. It's from Extension. So you want to add vegetables and fruits to your meal plan based on when it's in season if you want it fresh. Frozen fruits and vegetables often are less expensive than fresh, but I know some of us, especially those of us that are obsessed with corn, like to have in season Illini super sweet corn. You know, we're in Illinois, so got to buy that when it is in season. If you are concerned about convenience, you want to look for salad bars or pre-cut produce to save yourself some time. You can also reduce some of the inflationary costs of food chain supply by shopping locally at farmers markets when it's available. And you can also look into growing your own food, either in your own garden, in the backyard, or on a patio, or through a community garden. But every garden is going to be different, especially community gardens. So just see what the rules are, what you have available around your area, and what seasons you can use it in. All right, so if you are going to grow your own food, your fruits and veggies, do you have indoor or outdoor space? If you are looking to grow indoors, you might have to get grow lights, which will be an existing cost. It'll be an additional cost for the light fixtures themselves, as well as running those lights. Obviously, LED lights are going to be cheaper to run than traditional grow lights, so you can keep that in mind, but it is an additional cost. Outdoor space, you want to make sure that you have enough space for the types of things that you want to grow, and you have enough sun in those space for it to grow without additional intervention. Like grow lights outside are not very convenient. You might also think about whether you have the ability to start seeds or buy starts. I like to grow some of my own vegetables, but I am terrible at starting seeds. It's just not something that I'm good at. So I tend to buy starts instead of starting my own. However, I do know, because I've tried to start seeds in the past, that there are some libraries, public libraries, that have seed banks or seed libraries. You might check your local library to see if you can get seeds in order to start your own seeds. Typically, or heirloom or organic starts or seeds tend to cost more, but you might want to look at what the benefits of those are compared to other types of vegetables or fruits. If you don't have indoor or outdoor space that would be beneficial for gardening, you might look into community gardening. If you do have just a patio to work with and you have sun on that patio, you'll be limited to container gardening. And in container gardening, usually has to be watered more because the containers dry out. So you'll have to think about the additional costs of water. Regardless of where you're going to be gardening, you probably will need tools and fertilizer. Sometimes you'll need soil or soil amendments. You also want to think about the time it takes for these gardening. So for example, if you plan on going on vacation for 2 weeks every summer during growing season, are you going to have somebody come in and take care of your vegetables? Or is it not something that you are willing to invest a lot of time and effort in for it to end up getting all dried up because it didn't rain while you were on vacation? So, and you might also have pest control things that you have to pay for. So just keep those in mind if you do plan on growing your own food. And obviously Illinois Extension, our partner on this program and a lot of our other Get Savvy Grow Your Green Stuff series webinars, has a lot of resources for gardening. So to create your food budget, you want to track what your spending is, where you're spending more. It's always best that when you're budgeting for food, maybe even for the first time, that you track your spending. For example, you might be shocked at how much you're eating out, or maybe you're shocked on how much you're losing on food spoilage. So you want to set limits and compare what your actual behaviors are to what your intended behaviors are, and make changes based on what you is most appropriate for your values and your situation. So as you start tracking your spending, you might notice that food costs kind of vary drastically every week or month. You might want to track that food at home versus eating out differently to see kind of where your money is going. The chart that we just shared in the chat is from the USDA. It's updated every month and shows different food plan costs depending on your family size. So if you live on one of our college campuses or any of them nationally, make sure to review your meal plan and make sure that you're getting the most out of it. Check with your school to see if you can choose a lower cost option at the beginning of the semester. I know we're mid-semester right now. And see if you can increase if you need to later, depending on what your needs are and what your resources are. So that's something to assess as you're thinking about maybe next semester's food costs if you're a college student. But this kind of gives you an idea of what costs can be based on whether you are looking at a low-cost food plan, moderate cost plan, or a liberal plan. So luckily we have a lot of options to look that up in the chat. So the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP, helps low-income people and families buy food they need for good health. And you might be interested in learning more about how to qualify for that. If you are somewhere besides Illinois, we mainly shared Illinois information, you can dial 211 or go to 211.org for information on essential community services that are in your area within the US. So keep those things in mind. You can also use the Find Food Illinois map to find places in your community offering free food or meals. You can also find stores and markets that accept SNAP or link cards or WIC coupons. Plus, you can see kind of where the nearest Department of Human Services or WIC office is close to you. You can enter your zip code and maybe your city to get started with finding information related to food in your area. All right, so we talked a lot about apps. They can do a lot of different things to help us save money on food. For example, they can help us with coupons or rebates. They can also help us with making lists, shopping lists, or meal planning lists. They can even scan barcodes that we have available to us and make a list for next time that we go to the store, for example. So look at maybe the apps from the grocery store that you go to most often. Some of them can help you with inventory pantry items or finding new recipes. If you want to share your favorite food-related apps in the chat, that'd be very valuable. I always like to learn about other new apps to help me save on food or reduce my food spending. So while you're doing that, I'm going to share some apps that are available as well. So the USDA MyPlate, we've shared a couple times in the chat. This is a website and an app that has a lot of great information on how to balance cost and nutrition when it comes to food. One of the links available is about healthy eating on a budget, and it has some tips on creating a grocery game plan, how to shop smart to fill your cart, as well as information on how to prepare healthy meals. And you can also do meal planning, and you can get email updates on different things as well through that. Eat, Move, Save is a University of Illinois Extension resource that combines financial wellness information with nutrition and physical activity and wellness information that can help you save money, but also focus on your health and well-being. So in summary, that In general, food spending trends vary significantly depending on your age, where you are, the availability of items that you would buy. There are a lot of food deserts in Illinois, which is why that food map is very helpful. You also want to look at comparing costs, both what your behaviors are with your spending trends compared to what you wanted to spend, as well as comparing unit pricing, looking at brand preferences, and even considering the costs of delivery versus pickup, be that for groceries or for your favorite pizza. You also want to look for ways to save when dining out. We talked about sharing meals, buying water with or getting water with your meals instead of buying a beverage. And then you can always use the plethora of apps available for ideas on recipes, cutting food waste, and other things that we've mentioned. Our next webinar is on student loan management, and it is April 3rd. We're going to kind of summarize all of the different aspects of managing your student loan from disbursement through repayment. We also did a webinar series that we'll probably be referencing quite a bit for specific aspects of student loan management, which we'll talk about on April 3rd. You can watch previous webinars on our YouTube channel, and you can stay in contact with all of the Get Savvy webinar series collaborators. And we'll stick around for any questions that you might have. But thank you for joining us today. We will be sending out all the links and the recorded webinar after it's been captioned, hopefully in the next couple weeks. Make sure that you have registered for today's webinar if you hadn't yet, so that you can get that follow-up email. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll stick around in case there are questions.
Thank you, everybody, for hopping on today.
I didn't see any specific questions, and there's no Q&A. Don't feel obligated to stick on. I know everyone's hungry now. I was really hungry working on these slides last week. All right, thank you, everyone.